Hello, everybody. How are you doing today? I hope you're good. I hope you're doing well. Good to have you again in our class. So, welcome to chess class, the class where thinkers are raised and leaders are made. Class where thinkers are raised and leaders are made. Okay. Remember, we've been looking at our series, problem solving, and we are taking a critical look at being proactive rather than being reactive in problem solving. It is your anticipated decision that helps you to do great exploits. You are thinking ahead of time to put solutions in place to the problems that you anticipate. All right. And when such problems come, the solutions are already waiting. And by so doing that, you have booked your place in leadership. Now, you'll be so trusted to be given assignments because they know you will just take the right decisions per time. And that is why in chess, we look at all these possibilities to helping us fine tune our leadership ability. And that is why chess class is great. And that is why almost everybody is trying to see how chess can impact, you know, how they behave and how they take decisions. Like I always tell you, in most of the big organizations, chess is part of their training. Why? Because they want to see your problem solving skills. They want to see your hands on issues. And of course, they want to see your reactive abilities to situations. They want to see how calm you are. They want to see how reasonable you are in the midst of issues. So it is very important for us to work on our abilities, and that is why you're having chess. All right. Now today, I want us to go back and examine the topic we looked at some few weeks ago. I received some reports, all right, and of course, some people were like, um, we need to explain further so that you can understand better, all right. Now, the relationships between pinning and a skewer. All right, you remember we talked about pinning, pin breaking. These are tactics that you need, all right, in problem solving, and these are, you know, um, tactics for the beginners. We did that very long time ago, but we try to brushing it up. All right, now uh, we we need to understand perfectly well the relationship or the differences between pinning and a skewer. All right, pinning and a skewer, and that is why I brought this up for us to do a quick analysis and a better understanding of it. All right. Assuming we have a conventional class, we'll have done a series of hands-on to help our understanding. But I believe this one will also help us to get a good understanding better, all right, than what you used to have. Now, all right, now we want to explain what pinning is. Like I told you, pinning is a skill in chess that helps you to put your opponent in distress. All right, is a skill in chess, is a tactics in chess that helps you to put your opponent in distress. It destabilizes the plans of the opponent. All right. Now we're still also going to look at what if you are the one that is being pinned. What can you do? You remember we talked about pin breaking and all of that. So we want to go a bit further to see what you can do if you are the one at the receiving end. Okay. Now what is pinning? Pinning is when you tactically make a move to attack your opponent piece, and that piece cannot move. All right, that piece cannot move because if it does, it exposes a more valuable piece. You remember, it sounds like a skewer, but it is not a skewer. Now, I'm going to show you the difference between pinning and a skewer. Now, if you look at the board displayed on the board on the screen here, now you can see a king, and diagonally down you can see a queen. All right. Now you can see this bishop on d1. When the bishop moves from d1 to b3, now it attacks the queen. All right. Now, because it's the white stone, it attacks the queen, but that queen cannot move. The queen cannot move. Why? If it does, it exposes it exposes it exposes the king. So that queen will not be able to move. In other words, that queen is pinned. The queen is pinned. If the queen moves, then the king will be on check. And of course, the queen cannot move because that will be an illegal move. It will be an illegal move. So the queen cannot move. All right. Now, let's quickly see. So what is pin in chess? Pin occurs when an attacked piece cannot move without exposing an even more valuable piece. Can you see? Or target behind it. So I want us to quickly look at the kinds of pins very quickly. We have relative pins. I need you to take note of these. Relative pins, and you can also check through our last few classes about pinning, all right, so that you can build up your foundation. Now, one good thing about chess is that you need your residual knowledge, and that applies also for you in life. That is why we go to school. You need your residual knowledge, all right. Some of these things we've talked about, you need them in practicality. That helps you so much, all right. So you go back and see pinning from the basis of pinning with pawns and all of that. Okay, so we said we have a relative pin, we have an absolute pin, we have a cross pin, we have a partial pin, and we have a situational pin. Now I'm going to take these ones very quickly. What is relative pin? Relative pin is when a value of a pin piece is relatively lower than the piece behind it. Now, when you pin a piece, your opponent pins, but the value of the piece that is pinned is lower than the target. All right. So let's look at the example. Now, look at this. When the bishop moves, all right, from d8 to f6, it attacks the knight. All right. Now, the knight is pinned, but the knight is lower than the target, which is the rook. All right. Now, moving your knight will expose your rook. So you can see the knight is lower than the rook that is targeted. All right, that is a relative pinning. The knight that is pinned, all right, is lower in value, is lower in point than the rook behind it. Okay, now that is what is called a relative pin. Now you can argue, okay, I can move my knight. Now if you move your knight, the rook is bigger. All right, so what are you going to do? We're going to explain that in a subsequent class. Now let's look at absolute pin. Absolute pin is when the piece that is pinned is higher, all right, in value, and of course it makes it an illegal move. Look at it. Absolute pin. It said in the case where a piece is pinned to the king, it is illegal for that piece to leave the file or the diagonal that is pinned, else it will leave the king in check. All right. He said this is an absolute pin on the black queen since it will be an illegal for her to leave. Is bigger in value. All right. Now that seems like a skewer. You will remember we said relative pinning is when the pinned piece is lower, all right, in value to the targeted pin. piece, which is the rook. So the one that is pinned is lower, but this one, the one that is pinned, is higher. But the one behind it is the king. So it makes the queen, all right, pinned and in such a way that it cannot move because it's going to be an illegal move. That is what is called absolute pin. Absolute pin. All right. Now, what is a cross pin? Let's look at this. A cross pin. When a piece is pinned from two directions, all right, is pinned from two directions. There is nothing that is attacked from two directions. Now let's look at the example. Now if you look at the bishop, if you look at this bishop on e5 is pinned by a bishop on f4 and is pinned by a rook on e1. So when a piece is pinned on two sides, it's called a cross pin. Remember, we've looked at relative pin. We have looked at absolute pin. Now we're looking at a cross pin. When a piece is pinned on two sides, is called, or on two direction, or from two direction, is called a cross pin. All right. Now I want us to look at situational pin. Situational pin. Now, he said a situational pin refers to a scenario where it is not obvious that a piece is pinned. All right. It's not obvious. You will not look, and that is why we first of all talked about concentration. All right, we talked about concentration in chess is a skill you need. You won't know except you are very tactical, and that is what chess helps us to become. All right, you won't observe it. All right, but a closer observation will reveal that the piece is indirectly pinned. Let's look at this example. Now, if you look at this knight down here, the knight on c3, the knight on c3 seems not pinned because there is nothing behind it to show that it's pinned. But when you move that, knight, the rook is going straight up to put your king on check. All right. The knight here, the knight here is pinned, but you can't know. So that is a situational pin or situational pinning. Unless you are very observant, you just play the knight away. And when you move that knight away, perhaps capturing e4, you think, oh, I can capture, but you have opened up for a check. So you have to be careful. Now, this is where I want us to examine critically. What is the difference between a pin and a skewer? I want us to look at this very critically. Now, I want to look at the difference between a pin and a skewer. All right. Now, it says in the case of a pin, the pin piece has a lower value. We've talked about this. Check our class, all right, for a skewer. All right, you get a better understanding. So you can just relate the two together. The pinned piece has a lower value than the target behind it. Like the one we showed before, the knight is targeted, all right, or the knight is pinned, but there's a rook behind it. The knight is lower in value. That is a pin, all right? That is a pin, all right? When the pinned piece is lower in value than the target behind it. Now, what of a skewer? A skewer, all right, the piece in front of the line attack has a higher or similar value to the piece behind it. It is higher in the case of the queen. When the queen is targeted, all right, and maybe a rook is behind it, it is called a skewer. But when a queen is pinned and the king is behind it, you can like look at it as a skewer, but it is not a skewer. It is called absolute pin because the queen will become an illegal move when he moves it, and you can be disqualified for that. All right, so let's look at difference here. Okay, now this is a pinning. The knight is pinned. All right, now what kind of pin is this? What kind of pin is this? All right, the knight is lower in value. Okay, and then the target is the queen. That is pinning. We talked about that. Okay, now let's look at the skewer. You remember this? Let's look at the skewer. Now the queen is pinned. You can see it, the queen on c6 is pinned, but the target behind it, all right, is lower. The queen is higher, but the target behind it is lower. That is a skewer. The one that is pinned is higher. Is the tactics. You just get one. All right. Now the one in front is higher. The one behind is lower. But in pinning, the one in front is lower and the one behind is higher. So that is just the difference between a skewer and a pinning. A skewer, the one in front is higher. In pinning, the one in front is lower. All right. In skewer, let me repeat it again. In skewer, the one in front is, or the piece that is pinned is higher than the target. But in pinning, the piece that is pinned is lower than the target. All right. So some of the advantages of pinning: you can reduce the current value of your opponent while you are taking pieces. It helps you to take pieces. You can limit your opponent's defensive resources. You can increase the pressure on your opponents. You destabilize your opponent. All right. Now, using a bishop for pinning, you look at this. When your bishop moves, you remember it moves diagonally, and then it comes here. Now, this kind of pin is called what? We've talked about this. All right. This is an absolute pinning. Now the queen cannot move because it's going to put the king on check, and of course that becomes an illegal move. So in this case, you take the queen, all right, and you still put the king on check. You can see that. Okay. Now let's use a rook for pinning. Let's use a rook for pinning. Okay. Now, if you look at this, the queen, the bishop on d7 is pinned. Now, what kind of pinning is this? We've thought about it. We've talked about this. We've talked about this. Now, if you look at this, the bishop is pinned on two sides. The bishop is pinned on two sides. The rook on d1 is pinning the bishop on d7. Now, the bishop on g4 is also pinning the bishop on d7. That is called a cross pin or cross pinning. When a piece is attacked, pinned on two directions, all right, that is pinning. So you are using a rook and a bishop for a pinning. Okay. Now I want us to look at what you can do. What you can do when you are pinned. What you can do. Okay. When you are pinned, I want us to look at that. Okay. Now let's look at this. Let's look at this. I want us to let's look at this. Okay, how to escape from a pin tactics. You remember when we started this, I told you pinning and pin breaking. Okay, how you can escape pin breaking, how you can escape pinning. Okay, let's quickly rush through this. It's great when you can use pin tactics on your opponent, but what to do when you are on the receiving end of such tactics? What do you do? At least you should have anticipated. Can you see? You should have anticipated. I probably brought this up so that you can relate this to what we're saying. Being proactive, anticipated. You are proactive. He said ideally you should have anticipated. In problem solving, you anticipate. The problems are not here, but you are far ahead of time. That's what makes a leader. Okay, you should have anticipated that the possibility of the pin tactics in the first place. So let's just quickly rush through some of the things you do. He said, number one, make a threat with one of the pieces trapped. Now let's look at that example. Let's look at this example. Now, when you play the black knight, okay, you play the black knight. You play the black knight. If you play this black knight to d4. All right, you play it to d4, and then from d4 it moves to e2. That is already making a fork. You remember we talked about making a fork. Let's see, he said the black knight on c6. The black knight on c6 is pinned. So you have to move that tactically to help you to be on the advantage. Okay? Now look at this. The black knight c6 is pinned by bishop a4. All right? Now this is pinning because the knight is pinned to take the target, the rook. But what can you do to put yourself back on the advantage? What you can do is to play. Look at it. When you play the knight, when you play the knight, okay, you play the knight and then to d4, which at the same time strengthens the fork tactics. So when you play it, you are making a fork. The king is on check and the rook is at stake. All right. So that is one tactic. Now another tactic. Let's see. Use the counter tactics to remove your opponent's spinning piece. Let's look at it. Let's look at it. Let's look at it. Now, what is pinned there? The rook is pinned. The rook is pinned to take the queen. All right? And you have a knight here. So what can you do? What can you do? What can you do? When you move your knight, you put the king on check. All right? When you move the knight, you put the king on check. So you have secured the pinning. You have put yourself away from the disadvantage level to the advantage level. Now look at this. Another way to potentially escape from a pin is if you can find a way to get rid of the piece that pins you. Now when you move the knight, to e7, the king is on check. All right, the king is on check. When the king is on check, you remember residual knowledge, we talked about it. When the king is on check, there are three things you do. Is either you capture the checker, all right, or you run away, or you block. So when you move the knight, the king is checked. And when the king is checked, you have something to capture. So he can capture the knight. When he captures the knight with his rook, all right, then you can position your queen. You can position your queen now in such a way that you are no more pinned. Do you understand? So these are the ways to pin. We have seen the difference between a pinning and a skewer now, and then we have seen some of the things you can do. We have looked at some types of pinning. We have looked at some things you can do when you are pinned so that it can help you to anticipate. It can help you to change the situation. All right. I hope you get a better understanding now. You can work on these over and over and let it become part of your life. All right. In problem solving, you have a task. Look ahead, think ahead. What are the likelihood of problems? All right. So that your solution to the problem will not become a problem itself. So you can anticipate what are the likelihood, what are the possibilities of problems arising from what I'm going to do. Okay, what am I putting in place to checkmate all of this? It helps you to become a better problem solver. Thank you so much for this class.